inshallah, will be our verses to discuss. For the love of Imam al-Hussein, one last salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين سيدنا الممجد بشير المصدق المصطفى الأمجد المحمود الأحمد أبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين ولعنة الله على الظالمين من الأولين والآخرين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه المجيد وفرقانه الحميد وقوله الحق. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. كي لا يكون دولة بين الأغنياء منكم وما آتاكم الرسول فخذوه وما نهاكم عنه فانتهوا واتقوا الله إن الله شديد العقاب. آمنا بالله. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. Awaited Savior of humanity, Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam, my respected elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. 2 nights ago we started discussing the issue of the maqasid al-sharia, the ultimate goals and aspirations of the divine law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We stated that this is the way to know ultimately which direction and trajectory Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to be on. If the goals of Islam are A, B and C, then we know that we are in line with Islam if we are also working towards, or we are in line with those goals. Therefore, if, for example, the goal of Islam is mercy, the goal of Islam is to help you to achieve the fullness of your potential in your life, if Islam is to help create a structured society which lives in harmony with each other, if a goal of Islam is the safety and security of its citizens, then if we are working towards those things, then we are in line with the Sharia. If, in the realist sense, we are not actually active or in line with those goals, then we are not actually in line with the Sharia. And therefore we can immediately tell whether we are practicing Islam haqiqi, in the realist sense, in the truest sense, or whether we are actually practicing Islam by name, but not really in the reality of the religion itself. And we stated, for example, within the Holy Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, شَرَعَ لَكُمْ مِنَ الدِّينِ مَا وَصَّى بِهِ نُوحٌ وَإِبْرَاهِيمَ وَمُوسَى وَعِيسَى أَنْ أَقِيمُوا الدِّينَ وَلَا تَتَفَرَّقُوا فِيهِ. The Sharia has been prescribed to you, O Muslims, just like it was prescribed to those prophets before you. What are the components of the Sharia? And aqimuddin, to establish the righteous way of living. وَلَا تَتَفَرَّقُوا فِيهِ, and to not be divided therein. Therefore, it is evident that these are amongst the maqasid, the goals of the Sharia. And therefore, if I am one who creates difference, if I am the one who creates sectarianism, if I am the one who creates invalid division, if I am the one who creates hostility, I am not in line with the Sharia. Therefore, when we practice the religion, it has to be in accordance with the goals of the religion, and not my own desires of how I want to think the religion is. As we've been stating in the previous nights, if you want to create your own religion, then do so. لَكُمْ دِينَكُمْ وَلِيَ دِينِ. However, don't call it Islam. Don't mix up truth and falsehood, and then say this is what Islam is. If you want to be a prophet of God and claim prophethood, and you want to claim your own religion, فَضَّلُوا بِسْمِ اللَّهِ الرَّحْمَنِ الرَّحِيمِ, go ahead, do what you want. But don't change the religion of Islam and say this is Islam when it's not Islam. Especially when the Quran is so obviously clear as to what the religion is and what it isn't. In light of that yesterday, we stated that amongst the goals of Islam are to keep the dignity and the honor of the human being. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. Allah has honored the children of Adam alayhi salam. We are honored by virtue of our aql. We are honored by virtue of the ibadat that we perform with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is why we are the best of creation, or should be the best of creation. In light of that comes certain huquq, rights upon mankind. We mentioned yesterday in Surah Taha, verses 113 to 115, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives human beings 4 initial human rights. He says mankind should not go hungry. Mankind should not be bare of clothing. Mankind should not be thirsty. Mankind should not live without shelter under the heat of the sun. Now, based upon this, stated that the primary way in which mankind loses their honor and dignity is because of the rampant poverty that is in place in this world today. And we stated that those two things are contradictory. Therefore, one of the goals of Islam, the way in which the Sharia is supposed to be implemented, is by ensuring we lift people out of poverty. If we are not active, either systemically as a religion of Islam, or systemically as institutions, or by virtue of our own individual selves trying in some way, shape or form to participate where we can in the upliftment of poverty, we are not in line with the Sharia. We are not in line with the goals of what Islam actually hopes to achieve. And therefore this is one of the biggest challenges that we have today. We then stated the hadith of the 6th Imam Jaffer Ladak salawatullah wa salamu alayhi, where he says the purification of your wealth, giving in charity, is a test upon the rich. It is a test upon the poor. It is a test upon the rich and a means to aid the poor. Then he continues in the hadith and he says, the reason as to why poverty exists, hunger exists in this world is because of the sins of the rich in this world. When the rich do not perform their obligations, this is why poverty happens. Which proves from the Imam's qawl, the Imam's saying, that poverty is man-made. It is because either there is a system which makes poverty, or individuals are not fulfilling their responsibilities. This is why poverty exists in the world. If we systemically have the right system, and we as individuals contribute in the right ways in society, we would immediately lift people out of poverty and degradation altogether, inshallah. We then stated there are a number of different ways Islam looks at dealing with poverty, why poverty is a problem, and so on and so forth. And we came to these ayats, and this inshallah is where we need to continue. And we talked about the different ways in which Islam approaches certain issues, about the structure of ownership and wealth, and the way in which Islam sees the issues of spending money. Let's just mention those and we continue inshallah and conclude this discussion in the next 5-10 minutes and move on to our new topic for tonight. The first thing we stated was, systemically across the world, how does Islam perceive ownership of human rights? When it comes to human utilities and basic needs, water, gas, electricity, and so on and so forth, anything that becomes a need for human beings to have a basic standard of living, Islam does not permit the commoditization of that thing. It does not permit the privatization of that thing. That thing is available for mankind. Water, gas, oil is not to be privatized by one country, is not to be privatized by a corporation, so that makes profit, whilst other human beings cannot afford that thing. If I have found water, or I have found gas, or I have found oil, or I have found cotton for clothing, and those create the basic standards of human rights, I cannot then privatize it and then sell it to you without you being able to afford it. Or sell it to you, but not sell it to you. It becomes obvious. Yet despite that today, we have systems where all these things are privatized. Some people can afford, some people cannot afford. It's given to some people, it's not given to some people. This is completely antithetical towards Islam. Therefore, as a result of this, Islam requires minimal standards of living for everyone across the world. And today, in a globalized society, Islam would also require a minimum universal wage, which means that everybody has a minimum amount coming into them, so that they do not go beyond the poverty line. We mentioned that Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib salawatullah wa salamu alayhi had implemented something like this. Now just to clarify, we were asked or pointed out yesterday correctly, what we mean by this is that when someone was below the poverty line, in the time of Imam Ali alayhi salam, he would write for them a minimum wage from within the Bayt al-Mal. So he understood minimum wage and the need for everyone to have access to a minimum living wage. Today, when we have a globalized economy, import and export from around the world, we also need to raise standards, and everywhere needs to have a basic universal wage so that no one is under the state of poverty. Then we also stated yesterday, where we concluded, that there are 4 different ways in which people can lift up from poverty. And Islam has looked at various different ways in which these happen. The first one we mentioned yesterday in our conclusion was what we call microfinancing. Microfinancing is what? It's like creating a mini economy for a family unit or for a very localized economy. The idea was that through your money, you invest in someone to give them the needs to be self-sustaining. You might buy them some livestock. You might buy them a small plot of land. You might buy them a sewing machine. You might give them money to buy a laptop and learn how to be able to program. All of these things are investments to lift people out of poverty. Where does this investment come from? It comes from your excess money. We mentioned in the ayah of Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, الَّذِينَ يَكْنِزُونَ الذَّهَبَ وَالْفِضَّةَ. Those people who hoard their money, فَبَشِّرْهُمْ بِعَذَابٍ أَلِيمٍ. Give glad tidings to those people that they will have a painful chastisement. If you have excess money, your income is 2,000, I'm just picking a number. Your income is 2,000. Your expenditure is 1,000. You need to save 500 for, going on Hajj, investment back into your business, looking after your property, buying something that you are legitimately saving for, no problem. But the excess is 500. What you have left over is 500. 1,000 bills, 500 genuine legitimate savings, 500 excess. Do not keep this money and hoard it as if you are someone stingy. فَبَشِّرْهُمْ بِعَذَابٍ أَلِيمٍ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says. That money has a right. The right is whom? The poor and the needy. And we should lift them out of poverty through what we call today in English as this type of social mobility programs. Now, next 5-10 minutes inshallah we will conclude about poverty and move on to our next topic. There are 3 more ways in which poverty can be removed, and many of them have their examples in Islam. There was a leading economist born in South India who migrated to the United States of America by the name of C.K. Prahalad. Please especially young brothers and sisters, go home tonight, Google these people, read about them, download their books, try to see their ideas, try to see which one is good, where we can build off them, what does Islam say. Tomorrow you will be the leaders of the community. We will be reliant upon you to lead the community in an Islamic fashion, not in accordance with ideas that are antithetical towards Islam. Shaykh Ladak, genius, leading figure in the world on removal of poverty. His idea was very simple. He said, in the world in which we live in today, there are three elements or three groups that end up often working in opposition with themselves. Rather, they need to work with each other in order to lift people out of poverty. The first one, of course, is the government. Government regulation and the type of money that the governments have. Second will be corporations. Now, the goal of the corporation is to make as much money as possible. It has a fiduciary duty to do this, meaning it has a responsibility to its owners and to its investors that it makes as much money as possible. It is only allowed to not make as much money as possible only if it is doing so which also makes more money for it. Let me give you an example. You'll often find that the corporation has a corporate strategy, an environmental strategy, and sometimes that cuts into their profits. But in certain legal philosophy, because the idea behind capitalism is that you must make as much money as possible, the only time you're allowed to lose money is if it's a reinvestment to make money. So if you're going to do something that is going to be socially beneficial, environmentally beneficial, it has to be justified that tomorrow it's going to make you more money. The corporation, especially in Western thinking, can use and abuse the human being or the environment to any extent. I'll give you one very brief story. In the United States of America, there was a huge legal case that took place a few years back. One of the leading car companies was making their cars, and there was a part of the engine and where some of the oil supply is put, the petrol supply is put in. Now, if this car is crashed into, it needs to have certain protections to ensure that that part of the engine doesn't combust, which would mix with the oil, which would make the car explode. One lady, on the 24th of December, Christmas Eve, was driving with her 3 children and one friend of the children to somewhere, to have a family gathering for Christmas. Car went into the back of them, car exploded. Children died, children were burnt. They took the car company to court, and when they went through the documents, they found the following. The company in the United States had said, we will not make a metal plate to reinforce around that part of the engine which is most susceptible to being broken and exploding, because it will cost $2 extra to do so. So what did they do? They produced literally millions of cars, and at the saving of $2 did not reinforce the one place that was risky, that if you hit it in a certain direction, a certain pace, it would explode. And they knew it because there's testing of cars, isn't there? You have the crash test dummy, they go through thousands of tests. The court documents showed it. The justification in the court by the lawyers is this is capitalism. We have to make as much money as possible, and it doesn't matter who is injured, whether it's the environment, whether it's pollution, whether it's people. This is our fiduciary responsibility. And so long as it wasn't legally binding for us to reinforce that part of the engine, we wouldn't do so. This isn't our rules, this is the rules of the country. This is capitalism. So now, because Shaykh Ladak understood very well that corporations want to just make as much money as possible, this is a second element that you have to utilize properly in order to lift people from poverty. Third, with the NGOs. NGOs are those international organizations, charities, work with, for example, the United Nations to lift people out of poverty or to help rebuild and so on and so forth. He said we need to get these three to work together somehow. What is it? He said the governments have the legislations, what you can do, where you can do it, how much they can invest and so on and so forth. The NGOs are the good-hearted people. So those are the people that really work every day to lift people out of poverty. They have the most care and concern for human rights, obligations to help people. But they don't have expertise in certain things. All they are is expertise in their fields of lifting people out of poverty. But they don't have access to materials. Sometimes they have money because good people give them money. Sometimes they have money because governments give them money. But they're still at the reliance and behest of others. But then there is the third. It's the corporation. And they are blinded by everything other than to money. So what you need to do is get these three groups working together. And he gives an example. You've all heard of IKEA, right? Do you know IKEA? Global company, and they make flat packs, things like beds, things like bookcases, things like chairs, but they're the world's leading company in this area. The idea, he said, as an example, what you have is certain parts of the world, certain cities, so on and so forth, what we might call slum cities, favelas in Portuguese, in Brazil, and the way in which they live is so impoverished that they're living in shacks. In fact, for those of you, inshallah, when you go to Karbala next, please, don't just stay inside the Haram area. Take a taxi and go outside. See how people live in Iraq, just the way people also live in other parts of the world and here. But they are also living in tin shacks. No electricity at times, no clean water at times. See what's happening. Now, he says, look, you've got government, and you've got NGOs, and you've got these corporations. Why not give the money to the corporations who desperately want it because they're just money hungry, to help build? And then why don't you give the contract to the NGO to be able to implement? And through these three, we can lift people out of poverty because everybody wins. The government have someone else to do it on their behalf when they're clearly incapable of lifting people out of poverty. The company makes money, and the NGO get to do what they do best, which is help people. This is an example, this is an idea. The reason why I'm showing it to you is that thinkers are trying to work. We also need to think about these things. Why? Because even in our own communities, there are people who have access to government. There are people who are very wealthy in business, very good in business. And there are also people who spend their time dedicated towards lifting people out of poverty. How do you get those three to come together is for yourself. Understand that those projects have got basis already presented for you. Another example of lifting people out of poverty comes from a person by the name of Jeffrey Sachs. Jeffrey Sachs. Again, note this name down, think about this guy, look at him. Jeffrey Sachs is one of the most brilliant thinkers of our era. May Allah bless him for the good work he does, and inshallah guide him towards the school of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam. He is a champion of sustainability. Jeffrey Sachs had an idea where he said, the problem is all of these countries are giving money to developing nations in the areas in which they want. So there's a bias. When America gives money, does it give money because it wants to give money or because it expects something back? You answer that for yourself. And where does it go? To whom does it go? Does it go to the right people? Does it go to those people who are actually good people or not? Often we don't get to know until it's too late. That actually this needs to be pooled centrally, where the right people have authority over that money together. He said there are 6 UN aid agencies, pool all that international aid money into one central place, and then have the right people oversee the investment of that money. Do you know where this is mentioned in Islam? In our modernity, in the way in which khums works. We have marja, correct? Marja is responsible to oversee the collection and the implementation of that money, correct or not? What you'll find is many people saying, I don't want to pay my khums. What did the sixth Imam alayhi salam say? Had the rich given their zakat, given their purification of their wealth properly, there would be no Muslim that was going without. When we go to the right sources, we'll be able to invest properly. Make sure we pay our zakat, our khums, and our sadaqah, inshallah. Idea number 4, which again has a role in Islam. Again, a leading thinker, again, probably considered to be the greatest economic mind of our era, by the name of Thomas Piketty. Again, note the name down, look at his work, download his works. Thomas Piketty. Piketty had an amazing idea. You'll love this one. He says there are 500 global corporations, the leading 500 corporations, the 500 most richest people in the world as well. Right now, these corporations often don't pay any tax. Google, Amazon, Exxon, they all avoid as much tax as possible. Again, which is the reason why there is poverty, because they don't pay their fair share. Piketty said something very simple. Because we live in a globalized world, create globalized laws. We're supposed to have them. There's supposed to be an international criminal court. Barack Obama has drone struck 800 people, civilians, killed 800 civilians in his time. No disputing the numbers. Donald Trump has killed more than 2,000 civilians through drone strikes, just drone strikes, civilians. Where is the international law? It's not working. But we need international law for a globalized world. Piketty said, charge 2.5% tax to every leading top 500 company and every top 500 most richest person in the world. Tell me, brothers, where is 2.5% found in your fiqh? Zakat. If you make money in a certain area, what do you pay? 2.5%. He said, as a leading economist, 10 years of charging 2.5% on the top 500 companies, top 500 people, poverty would be eradicated globally within 10 years if that money is invested properly. He's got the figures in his book to show you. So now, just to conclude, I want to read these verses from Surah Al-Hashr and show you exactly what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says about the principles of dealing with poverty, just to make sure that you and I are in the right thinking about these issues. Verse number 7, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. كَيْ لَا يَكُونَ دُولَةً بَيْنَ أَغْنِيَاء مِنْكُمْ. Capitalism believes that money goes towards the richest, stays with the richest, and then they call it trickle-down economics. If they have money, then they'll employ people. So you have to give all the tax breaks and keep the money amongst the rich so that they employ the poor. This is the first principle of capitalism. You want to know what Islam says? Look at this verse. Money should not remain in turns amongst the rich folk. Not my words, Allah's words within the Quran. Now, where does this become proven? And again, we're talking about how you must implement your money, where you spend your money, and how you organize your money. You know when you have a will, may Allah grant you all long lives, but we will all have to have an inheritance. When you die, you must have a will, correct? When you give your inheritance, your money, your property, your jewelry, your books, your clothes, is it for you to choose how you give, or is it ordained upon you how you give? It's set for you, isn't it? The first 2/3 are set, and there are ways in which you have to give. The first grouping would be, for example, to your spouse. You've got your children, you've got your brothers and sisters, you've got your uncles, you've got your grandparents. Depending on who's alive, you give in accordance with what Sharia says. Why do you think Sharia has placed those three groups and categories for you to give as widely as possible to your family members? Because the money isn't supposed to stay amongst one group of people. It's supposed to be spread amongst as many people as possible. Can you see the fikr of Islam? Thinking of Islam. It's so beautiful. The money isn't just supposed to be inherited by your child, to stay with one person. The money also goes sideways to your other family members, so they also inherit. It goes as wide as possible. And then 1/3 of your inheritance can go anywhere you want. Why? So you give it outside your family. So you give it to an organization or an institution or something that is needy. Can you see how Islam thinks? It's not about the rich. It's about ongoing sustainability of as many people as possible. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala stated and praised people again in their attitude, in the way in which they think. In verse number 9, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that those people like the Ansar, they are the truthful and the successful ones. Why? Because they prefer other people over themselves, even if they are in a state of financial difficulties. Most of us are not really well off to be so easygoing. Most of us all struggle from time to time. Even then, if you find someone in need, give preference to that person over yourself where possible. Why? It's not really your money, Allah's money. Number 2, Allah promises, if you give, He will give to you manifold. The one who gave you in the first place will certainly give you again. So there's no worries about having to give. Now, brothers and sisters, this is our discussion on poverty. We need to move now very quickly to the issue of water and environmental sustainability. We stated that there are 4 basic human rights. Not to go hungry, not to go bare of clothing, not to go thirsty, and not to be devoid of shelter. We've spoken about poverty, but there is also the need to speak about sustainable water. Brothers and sisters, right now there are 7.2 billion people in this world. And we are already going and straining our resources because of the way in which we are using those resources. We're going to talk about this very importantly in a minute, how we are using our resources. By the year 2050, the world is predicted to now be at closer to 12 billion people. It will put on half the global population by 2050, based on birth rates, based on the length in which we're living to, and based on the way in which we're living longer because we're finding more cures to diseases. Now imagine for a second, I added 50% population in this room. It would become tighter, wouldn't it? And if there's only a certain amount that's going round, or the way in which the distribution of the resources are, then some people will go without, or some people will go with even less. Therefore, obviously, we need to be in a position where we're thinking about how we spend our money, where we spend our money, and the way in which we create sustainable resource for the next generation. Me and you will go very soon. It will be over for us. It will be this young boy and this young boy who inherits the problems that we create in our society. If we care for our children, we care for our grandchildren, we would wake up to these realities very, very quickly. In India, there are approximately 1.2, maybe 1.3 billion people, correct? By the year 2030, right now, there are 300 million people living in urban areas. According to government statistics, by the year 2030, it will be 900 million people living in these urban areas in India. There is going to be a huge transference of population from village to urban between now and 2030. And I'm asking you a simple question based on the resources that are here right now. How will that affect you? Then when you come to the issue of increased population, not just migration of population, growth of population, how will that impact you? Are you aware of these things? Are you prepared for these things? Or do you leave it to your government to deal with these things only? I'm just asking. Alhamdulillah, you have a bullet train coming. I'm not oblivious. You can see I've done my research. And a good metro system. Well, alhamdulillah, I have a bullet train coming. Maybe you need it, maybe you don't. Modi knows whether you need it or whether you don't. May Allah bless all of our good politicians, inshallah. So now, I'm asking you, where is the investment going? Where is the community investment going? Are you prepared? Are we even aware of these challenges? If the maqsad of Islam, the maqsad of Sharia, according to the Holy Prophet of Islam, what did we say the hadith? Firstly the verse, people to live in harmony with each other. What did the hadith say? People should live in aman wa surur. In aman being safety, security, and surur, happiness. Are you prepared for a migration of 300 million to 900 million people? To live in security and peacefulness and happiness? Well, where is our living in Sharia? Can you see this? Can you see the difference between Sharia and the way in which we're living? Now, these challenges that are upon us, especially when it comes to water and water resource, according to all futurologists sound like a funny word, someone who tries to just randomly predict the future. No. Futurologist is a science that actually looks into the way in which the future is developing, technologically, environmentally, and makes profound estimations on what will happen. All, and listen to my words, all leading futurologists say that the future wars in this world will be fought over water, just like currently wars are fought over oil. Because there is a lack of resource of water and the way in which we are using it at the moment, and when the world puts on an additional 50% population, every country will be fighting over water resource. Again, Google these things, please. There is something, a type of technology that's happening in the moment where they can make clouds rain. And they can also stop clouds from raining. It's a type of chemical that you put in the air that either builds up the precipitation or stops the precipitation. Those countries that have access to this, knowing the direction of wind, will ultimately decide where it rains, when it rains, and how much it rains. If you're a country that's already struggling for water, and there is a country that can use these types of weapons, what will happen in the future to your natural resources? You don't think it will happen? They didn't drop an atom bomb on 500,000 innocent people? You think they won't starve Muslims or non-Muslims? What is it about? Money. My country is the best country. Remember what we said. Don't think like they want you to think. Think like a Muslim. My country is the best country. Make America great again at the expense of the rest of the world. You don't think Donald Trump would do that? You don't think white nationalists would do that? If they can drone strike 2,000 people, you think they care if they stop water from coming to you? Did Yazid, Umar ibn Sa'ad care if they stopped water coming from children? History isn't history. History is a lesson, brother. History is to understand what is in front of you, what is taking place. So now when it comes to water conservation and building pure water and proper water supplies, surely the one people that would be at the forefront of this issue would be those people who weep over the thirst of Sayyidah Ruqayya. I'm going to cry over Abu Fadl. I'm going to cry over Ali Asghar's thirst. I'm going to cry over Sakina crying out Al-Atash, Al-Atash. I'm going to cry over Hussein ibn Ali, but then I'm not going to care about water for other people. Does that make sense? Does that mean that Hussein? Remember when I asked you on night one, that Hussein alayhi salam was to sit with you and say, let me talk to you about what you're taking away from majalis 100 nights a year. What were your answers? To do matam? To do julus? Imam needs that? Alhamdulillah, it's central. It's central to the sustenance of our spirituality. It's going to help me on akhirah. It's going to get me into Jannah, no doubt. The Imam is looking at people without water, without food. And he's saying, you're crying over me, that I didn't have water and food, but there's a man who's there sitting hungry and thirsty. You know, there's a story. Imam al-Khomeini alayhi rahmah. Narration says, he went to perform wudu, and his young grandson followed him towards the bathroom. His grandson narrates, I saw my grandfather, Imam al-Khomeini, do something very strange that I had not seen any other person do. He opened the tap, he took the minimal amount of water that he needed, and then closed the tap, and then would do the action. Open the tap, take the water, close it, and then wipe his hand. Open the tap, take the minimal amount of water, put it on his arm, wipe it. Most people, they're just leaving the tap running, they're turning around talking, Assalamu alaikum brother, good to see you again, mashallah. Water's running. Quran says, Kulu washrabu wala tusrifu. Eat and drink, but don't do israf. Don't waste. Now Khomeini's grandson said, I saw him opening and closing, being very delicate with the amount of water. Afterwards I asked him, said, grandfather, why did you do this? He said, my dear grandson, I find it embarrassing to dare cry over the thirst of the children of Karbala whilst I am the one who wastes water at the same time. This is why Imam Khomeini was Imam Khomeini. Even something like this, he understood, he took the lesson from it. He wasn't just coming to the majlis and crying and then walking away with sharbat. He was understanding what it meant. The reality is he was embodying what he learned. Ilm, amal. Knowledge and action. Now, I want you to think about this because we talked about this briefly yesterday. We stated that these resources are not to be commoditized. Or if they are to be commoditized, it's only when everybody has enough. Water is for everyone, and so long as people don't have water, it's not to be commoditized and said that you can have but you can't have, you can afford but you can't. As we mentioned, the United Nations, read the document for yourself, the UN Declaration of Human Rights said up until only a couple of years ago, water is not a human right, you have to pay for it. That one thing that you need to sustain life, it's not your right to have it. We have to package it and sell it to you and make money so I can buy helicopters. You know who said this? Read these things for yourselves. Do you know the company Nestle? Everybody's nodding. You know Nestle? What do Nestle make? Mainly chocolates, water. Go and Google this tonight, so you're not just listening to me, you know it for yourself. The head of Nestle said, water and food is not a human right. Now he's going to food is not a human right. What do? We buy all his chocolates, make him super rich, so that he has more influence to bribe government, give him more power. Think about this very carefully. They said water wasn't a human right. Now, do you know what's happening? Those countries that have access to water, because we stated we live in a nationalistic idea, now the water belongs to the government, correct? So now imagine this is our country. I'm just giving an example, water is in this part. The government says now, because we're a nation state and we don't think about the world and equal distribution across the world, that water is ours, our natural resource. So now, they will either nationalize that water or they'll privatize that water. If that water is privatized, it's sold off to companies, correct or not? Now think about this. Who do they sell that water to? The majority of water is turned into what? Fizzy drinks. Think about what we said yesterday. There are thousands of different cornflake companies and flavors. How many different types of fizzy drinks are there? Dozens. I mean, named brands, unnamed brands, local brands. Yeah. So now think about this very carefully. The government thinks it's owning water. It then sells the water to the corporation. The corporation then turns water into something else. It then makes a profit on it to the extent that some people can't even afford it. What do we say? Most 2 billion people in the world live on $2 or less for the day. You think you're going to spend $1, half your money on a Coke? So now, water resource in the world is being usurped and used to be turned into commoditization. Tell me something, brothers and sisters. Do you drink fizzy drinks? If you do, you are sustaining an economy that buys drinks that takes water away from human beings so that they can't bathe, they can't wash their dishes, they can't wash their clothes, they can't even drink water because that water is being utilized to turn into something else. And then we're going to go to 12 billion people in the world. And even less water is going to be available because we keep sustaining these things. And then I have the audacity to come here and say, Labbaika ya Hussein, I cry over your thirst. I cry over the thirst of Azhar. Whilst I am the one who purchases the very same things that cause an Azhar today to go thirsty. I'm just asking because I'm young, you know better, you have more wisdom, you have better akhlaq. But tell me, is this the message of Hussein alayhi salam? To cry over him and then to buy the very same products that stops water from going to human beings when they need it? This is Islam? I'm just asking. Don't give your children these poisons. Forget the water. The amount of toxins that are in these drinks. It's the biggest causes for cancer, biggest causes for diabetes. Which parent gives their child cancer? Which parent gives their child diabetes? You know, in one can of Coke, it's 330 milliliters. Go and watch the BBC interview of the head of Coca-Cola. He says, there are 23 packets of sugar in one can of Coca-Cola. It takes 17 glasses of water for you to drink immediately to balance out what has been done to your body from one can of Coke. You want to give these people money to kill you? It's corporate greed. It's corporate murder. They don't care about you. You are just a dollar sign to them. You are not a human being. If these companies will not spend $2 to reinforce an engine that if it's crashed into will blow up, do you think Coca-Cola cares for you? Do you think McDonald's cares for you? you purchase wisely. Purchase with intellect. Purchase with a discerning eye. Because these are the things we are putting into your soul. These are the things we're putting into the soul of our children. These are the things that we want to go and meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with. In the world, there is what is known as fair trade. Have you heard of this? Fair trade products. There are some companies that enslave women and children, and then we go and buy their products. I'll give you another story. Read these books. Go and Google this book called, by Joel Bakan, The Corporation. The Corporation by Joel Bakan. His research on the way in which corporations around the world work. I'll give you another one, inshallah, to understand the sustainability issue, where we buy products from, whether we're actually making people poor through our purchases, whether we're liberating people from poverty. You've all heard of Nike? Yes? Nike? Nike had a factory in South America. Bakken says in his book, someone from the United States of America was responsible to go research into these factories to see what their standards of ethics, the environment for the workers, and so on and so forth was like. He went and he did the research. He went to this factory. He said it was barbed wire on the outside, and there was no sign to say this was a building of Nike. Doesn't Nike advertise everywhere? Yes? Why doesn't it advertise in this place? You'll see in a second. The US governmental worker walked in and started to interview, as was his right, the workers about what their conditions are in working. This is what they said. 1. Only women are allowed to work in those factories. Only a woman of a certain young age is supposed to work in those factories. They have to work 14 hours a day, non-stop. No breaks are allowed. Not even bathroom breaks. And, listen to this, they are not allowed to drink water in the 14 hours, because if they do, they might have to use the bathroom. And then we go and give la'na on Yazid, because he starved people. And then I am the one who purchases from Nike, sustaining an economy that starves women, and that stops women from drinking and having breaks. It continues in the interview. It says, the women, if they are pregnancy test every month, forced. And if there is a pregnancy found, they'll be fired on the spot. These t-shirts that they used to have to sew and embroider for Nike would be sold for $22.99 in the States. They would make a couple of cents only for themselves, the workers. Go and carry on buying Nike. Carry on sustaining this slavery. Islam came to abolish slavery. It came to break slavery, give rights to people, sustain life, give life and honor to people. I am the one who purchases from companies that slave people and stop people from drinking water in the day. And then I come here and I say, Labbaika ya Hussein. I'm just wondering where we are today. And so, the water that we buy, the products that we buy, we have to be very aware and try to only purchase as much as possible, where possible, from those fair trade companies where inspections are met, minimal standards of work and pay are met, rights for people, we're not forcing children into work, so that we are living as model human beings and not just human beings that are following whatever corporation advertises to us as if we are just puppets of those corporations. Lastly, the environment is also something that we need to talk about. We can't talk about it for long, we only have 1 or 2 more minutes. The environment needs to be sustained. Trump pulled out of the Paris Accord, where every country in the world managed to get together. And then, funnily enough, they were hit with 3 1 in 500 year hurricanes. And they're also hit in California with fires raging. A 4th phenomenon. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, ظَهَرَ الْفَسَادُ فِي الْبَرِّ وَالْبَحْرِ بِمَا كَسَبَتْ أَيْدِي النَّاسِ. Fasad has found its way on the land and on the sea by virtue of what man has done. Why? Why did Allah allow this fasad to happen? The next verse says, so that they may turn back towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That they may become aware. Surely now the American population would be aware, after all this, that if you're going to do something, it has a consequence to it. Brothers and sisters, again, here in India, you are part of the top 2 tiers of vulnerability to global warming and the effects of global warming. It wasn't long ago, 1 week, 2 weeks ago, you had flooding, many people died. What happens when this becomes more severe? What happens when this becomes more consistent? And then I am the one who is not sustainable. I buy as much plastic. I'm the one who leaves the lights on. I'm the one who fills up the kettle the whole way to boil water when I only need this much. I don't think about environmental sustainability. I don't think about recycling. I don't think about which products I buy. Here is one of the biggest targets for environmental sustainability. Brothers and sisters, you have to be at the forefront of it. You will know better than me, the government a few weeks ago announced that by the year 2030, it will be only electric cars that are to be sold as new cars here, correct? They are trying to push away your reliance upon oil. In fact, in New Delhi, maybe you know, I'm sure you do, New Delhi, there is that law that says men can only drive on odd days. You know this? In order to cut down the amount of cars in New Delhi, men are only allowed to drive on odd days, depending on when your license plate says, on the number of your license plate. Monday you can drive, Tuesday you can't. Women can drive every day, and it's right for protection of our sisters, and women in the community. But just think about this. I'm asking a simple question. If the Sharia and the goal of Sharia is your protection, your sustainability, your dignity, your honor, why aren't Shias leading in these fields? Why are we leaving it to other people to decide what is right and what is wrong, what is good and what is bad? And why are we the ones who are sustaining a global economy to engender and foster poverty and to continue slavery? Surely, brothers and sisters, we would be the ones who would lead on this matter. Please, your homework tonight is very simple. Number 1, when you go home, reflect on our own purchasing. Where do we buy? What do we buy? Do we even think about the consequences of those purchases? Number 2, what can we do, individuals, families, as a community, to make those changes? The Masjid, the Husayniyah, should be a reflection of Islam haqiqi, the reality of Islam. If we are not environmentally sustainable here, then where are we going to be environmentally sustainable? When your children come here, they should see Islam haqiqi. I can't govern what happens in your house. Your house is your house. But as a community, surely the one place that should reflect Islam is here. Then We can show the children this is Islam, make sure we go and implement it into our house. Tonight, you and I will commemorate the martyrdom of Muslim ibn Awsaja and Habib ibn Mubah. When the beloved of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam received that letter from him, he was in the middle of dyeing his beard. His wife asks him, what will you do to respond to the letter of your beloved Hussein? He says, I will dye this beard with the blood to protect Hussein. What does this show you? At the moment he learned of Hussein's need, he moved on it. It wasn't a delay. When the awaited saviour of humanity, Imam alayhi salam, returned, Ajjalallahu ta'ala faraj al-sharif, what will happen is, some Shia will delay, some Shia will move immediately towards him, correct or not? What will make you delay and what will make you move immediately to help Imam? In some way, shape or form. If you are used to delaying what you have learned, if you are used to delaying practicing, you will delay when the Imam comes. If you are someone who learns and implements, when the Imam comes, inshallah, you will immediately implement to move for him. Habib was like that. Habib immediately said, I will do. And he escapes from the city of Kufa. Muslim ibn Awsaja was the one who was the wakil of Hazrat Muslim ibn Aqil. When Muslim ibn Aqil wanted anything in the city of Kufa, it was Muslim ibn Awsaja that used to help him. When people came to give bay'ah, the first person who would screen them to make sure they were safe, make sure they weren't spies, would be Muslim ibn Awsaja. Both of them are in the army of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. It comes to the afternoon of the 10th of Muharram. Muslim ibn Awsaja goes out into the battle. When he goes out into the battle, he is struck down. When he is struck down, Imam alayhi salam and Habib ibn Mubah run towards him and sit down beside Muslim. He bids him, congratulations, O Muslim, you'll be going towards heaven. At this moment, Habib looks into the eyes of Muslim and says, oh my beloved Muslim, had I not been going, had I not known that I would be following you to paradise in a few minutes in martyrdom like you have been martyred, I would ask from you your wasiyyah. Tell me what your inheritance is. But I can't do it because I'm going in a few minutes to follow you. The Muslim says to him, oh Habib, my wasiyyah is this. And with the last ounces of strength that Muslim has, he lifts his hand and he points towards the face of Abu Abdullah. And he said, oh Habib, do you see this man? Do you see my beloved, my Imam? My wasiyyah to you is for you to look after him with every amount of strength that you have. That you do not allow him to die before you die. That you give your way before him. After the Dhuhr prayer, or according to one hadith, at the time of Dhuhr, one of the companions comes to the Imam and says, it is Salah time, let us pray. Imam calls out and says, may Allah reward you and make you amongst those who have protected the prayer. He says to him, go and tell the army that we need a moment to break for prayer and then we will continue the war. When the Imam is praying, they didn't even stop fighting with the Imam then. What did they do? They started to shower arrows. It was the companions that stood in front of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam taking the arrows. And only once he finished his salah did they fall down upon the floor. The enemies called out and said, oh Hussein, your prayer will never be accepted. Habib ibn Mubah, filled with rage, calls out and says, do you think your prayer will be accepted whilst the grandson of Rasulullah's prayer is not accepted? Who do you think you are? At this moment, he calls out to Hussein, he says, I wish to pray the prayer in Salah. I wish to pray the prayer of Salah in paradise behind Rasulullah. Do you give me permission to go? with such fervor, Imam says to his beloved, go, I allow you to go. Imam watches his beloved Habib ride out. He rides out, and according to hadith, he kills 62 of the enemies, sending them towards the pitfalls of hell. But at this moment, he is surrounded by the enemies. One person comes to him and hits him with a spear in the chest. At this moment, his enemy that he had called out to, do you think your prayer will be accepted whilst his isn't? By the name of Haseen, Haseen comes with a sword and strikes Habib ibn Madahir on the head. He falls towards the ground. At this moment, the first man who dug the spear into Habib's chest comes off his horse and with one blow strikes the neck of Habib, severing his head towards the floor. Striking his head off. At this moment, it is said that Haseen and this man began to argue. Haseen said, I want the head of Habib ibn Madahir as my trophy. I also helped to kill him. The man said, no, I will take this head because I want the reward from Yazid. He said, I don't want the reward. All I want is the adulation of being the one that carries the head of the Habib Hussein. That's all I want. He took his head, he wrapped it, and he placed it around his horse. And when he would ride his horse, he would take the sabaya, the women and children, and make them walk behind that horse, which had the head of Habib hanging from around it. The hadith says that there was a young boy who would follow this horse, would walk behind it, would chase behind it, would stand next to him. Later on, Haseen became angry. What are you doing? Go away from the horse. He keeps looking at this head. He says, oh child, why do you keep looking at the head on this horse? He says, this is the head of my father. This is the head of my father, Habib ibn Madahir. Please give me this head. I wish to bury this head. We will say to you, oh child, indeed this is the head of Habib ibn Madahir. But there too is the head of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. What is he doing to it? He is hitting it with a stick. He is throwing wine upon it. Oh child, you are crying for your father Habib, but come with us and let us cry for the head of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إن لله وإنا إليه راجعون. Please raise your hands, let us join each other in dua. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to hasten the appearance of Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam, to allow us to be alongside him at all times in our life and in our death. If we are to pass away from this world before his coming, raise us from our graves so that we partake in the victories of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad. We ask you, Ya Allah, help us to understand the movement of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. Implement it properly into our lives so that we look after the poor, and make sure that there is water for everybody. We help move people out of slavery and buy that which is correct to be able to buy, inshaAllah. We ask you in the final moments of our life, we die in the love of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad. Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. For the love of all the companions and shuhada of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, please recite one loud salawat ala Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad.